In the process of making videos on this channel, I have from time to time been guilty of making very definite statements. The best episode ever, the best supporting cast, the worst written, the dullest episode, and so forth. And normally I shouldn't make these statements because all art and TV is entirely subjective. And if there's one thing that Doctor Who fans can agree on, it's that Doctor Who fans can't agree about anything. Every episode, character, doctor, showrunner, producer, director and writer has their fans and their detractors. But to me, there is one statement I can make definitively, and I don't think any fans could disagree with me on. The fact is that nothing in the Doctor Who fandom is as divisive, as controversial, and as hotly debated as The Timeless Child. I'm going to set my stall out early on this one. I hate The Timeless Child. I passionately despise everything it does to the show and to the lead character. I appreciate that not everyone does, but this is an opinion piece. So I'm not going to sit on the fence. I hate The Timeless Child. There are a lot of good arguments that have been made against it. The most vocal of these have been people complaining about canon inconsistencies and continuity errors. These issues have included the Doctor being given extra lives on Trenzalore, Clara only seen from the first Doctor onwards inside the Doctor's time stream, and a host of other very valid points. But personally, I've never really cared about canon continuity in a show like Doctor Who. And to me, the only canonical inconsistency that really bugs me is Ruth's TARDIS being a police box, which absolutely enrages me for some reason. The canon issues may be annoying to some, but ultimately, for me, they can be overlooked. Turning the Doctor into an immortal demigod, demystifying Gallifrey and explaining the origins of the Time Lords, and making the Doctor special are all cardinal sins that Chris Chibnall has now committed that make me really peeved off. But that's not what I want to talk about. No, the thing I want to talk about, and that nobody seems to mention, is that in making the Doctor the Timeless Child, Chris Chibnall has made the first Doctor's entire story arc and character development absolutely irrelevant. And by extension, this whole journey that this character goes on throughout the entirety of the 60s, from the coward who kidnaps two school teachers and tries to brain a caveman to death to help himself escape in an earthly child, all the way to standing in front of the Time Lords on trial, pleading to them that their non-interference makes them compliant in the evils of the universe, and that these evils need to be fought. All of it, all of that story arc is now without value or any real point. Since the abomination that was The Timeless Children aired in March 2020, acting as the instigation for the coming apocalypse, I have watched Classic Who in its entirety, having only seen a handful of stories, mainly Pertwee stories before that. It's only natural then that when I watched the Hartnell era, and by extension Troughton's era, I became more and more infuriated with what The Timeless Child does, because this pointless, lore-altering twist adds absolutely nothing to the character of the Doctor. But it takes so much away from these 6 seasons and the 253 episodes from An Unearthly Child to the War Games. The crux of The Timeless Child, if you don't know, is that a Shabogan explorer named Tecteun discovered on her travels of the universe a child standing below an interdimensional portal and took that child back to her home planet, where one day the child was playing and fell to her death before regenerating. This was the first regeneration on Gallifrey, and obsessed with learning the secret of regeneration, Tecteun took the child and experimented on them, until one day she discovered the secret of regeneration, and from her came the Time Lords. This would actually be not that bad of a twist. Not amazing, because it still does demystify the Time Lords, but no, that's not the real problem. The real problem here is when the awful twist that everyone saw coming was finally spoken out loud, when the Master confirmed that, surprise, surprise, this child, this interdimensional demigod who founded regeneration itself, who is immortal and ultimately special, is of course the Doctor. Because of course it is. Characters can't just be special through their actions. How many shows and films are going to retcon importance into their lead characters' origins to try and make them important, to try and make them special? Whereas, in fact, to me, it removes what makes them special, because it now means that it's not through their actions that they have become special, not through their choices and their relationships have they become a hero. No, in fact, they were always special. I hate it when any films or TV shows do this. It cheapens every decision that character has made. Rey is no longer special for her actions in Star Wars, no. Rather, she was destined to become a hero by her lineage. The most aggravating example of this I can think of is the retcon story of Peter Parker's parents in Mark Webb's Amazing Spider-Man films that make it so that Peter's father had engineered the radioactive spiders and used his own DNA so that only Peter could become Spider-Man. This meant to make Peter seem special, unique, play into those chosen one tropes that are quite prevalent in a lot of fantasy fiction. But to me, making him special by birth rather than through his actions and his decisions only serve to lessen him as a character. All of this is a problem with The Timeless Child, but much worse, because the Series 12's finale's big twist rewrites 57 years of character building for no real reason. If you're only familiar with New Who and start your classic journey with An Unearthly Child, you will find the Doctor we met back in 1963 startlingly different from the one we are so used to now. The character that William Hartnell played in November 63 was an abrasive, rude, arrogant man who clearly regarded the humans he met as of vastly lower intelligence. He could be self-centered, selfish, and cowardly. In other words, he wasn't yet the Doctor we know and love. And in a way, the journey that the first Doctor goes on during his 3 and a bit seasons is a journey of him learning what it means to be the Doctor. It's almost like an entirely different show at certain points in those early years. The main protagonist is not the Doctor, but rather Ian and Barbara. Ian is almost like the main character of the show. He is the hero of the piece, saving people, getting all the action, and he has a real desire to help people wherever they go. The Doctor at this point is more of an explorer or an interested scientist. He loves getting samples of alien soil, looking at alien plants, and meeting famous historical figures, regardless of whether they were a nice person or a horrible one. He didn't care. He was just in this for the exploration, to seek knowledge and to observe the universe. The only problem for him is that the humans he picked up along the way keep getting him dragged into political conspiracies, local conflicts, and fights against Daleks. I would describe early Hartnell as a reluctant hero. If he gets dragged into a situation, he'll help, if only to get himself out of it. But he still holds those Gallifreyan principles of non-interference, and he doesn't want to get involved. It's through his interaction with the humans around him that he goes from that character to the man who tells the Time Lord 6 seasons later that not only does he admit that he's constantly interfered in the affairs of other peoples and planets, but that he is proud of his actions. The companions he not only picks up, but gets used to having around, teach him to see the universe a very different way. It's through people like Ian and Barbara who start to break down the Doctor's rough exterior and teach him the lessons that will define the character forever. That the evil in the universe must be fought, and you should always stand up and be counted when you're in the face of something wrong. These lessons are most evident throughout the Hartnell era, where he softens considerably throughout the course of his run. The Doctor in An Unearthly Child kidnaps Ian and Barbara when Susan threatens to leave him. He is motivated then through self-centered reasoning and selfish want. Yet just over a season later, he makes the active decision to let Susan go because he believes that he shouldn't hold her back anymore. The man who was brash and frankly mean to Ian and Barbara in An Unearthly Child realises how much he will miss them when they leave. And most importantly, the man who was so cowardly and selfish at points in that story is so far away from the man who heroically stands his ground as he walks out in front of an oncoming war machine as the army behind him retreats. That is real character development, and it's totally earned. Every bit of it is justified. In the 3 seasons up to the war machines, you can watch that character arc, and you totally earned that moment. He doesn't revel in his interference yet. He hasn't earned mythic status in time and space. He is just an ordinary man making a stand. We have watched him observe since season 1, observing the humans he has had as companions, observe their bravery and their selflessness, their sense of right and wrong, and he has learnt from them, and in that moment, standing up against a war machine, he is making an active decision to stand against it. Even though it's none of his business, it's not alien, it's not even a fixed point that's being altered and he has to nobly protect time like a story with a monk in it. It's just something wrong that he is not going to stand for. For many, this is the moment where the Doctor we met in season 1 becomes the character many would now recognise to be the Doctor, having been taught the values, the lessons, and the morality that would define the character for the next 50 plus years. He has become a hero. He may not realise it until he stands against the Time Lords, but he has become the hero of the story. who stands up for the little man against all the odds, and he's become a hero. He's become special through his choices and his actions. The problem is, the Timeless Child detracts from all of this. The Timeless Child's biggest problem is that it makes this Doctor special by virtue of his birth rather than through his actions. None of Hartnell's learning, evolving, and his descent towards heroism means a thing if he was always someone special. I've always loved that little exchange at the end of Robot of Sherwood when Robin says, "Is it so hard to credit that a man born into wealth and privilege would find the plight of the weak and oppressed too much to bear, until one night he is moved to steal a TARDIS, fly among the stars, fighting the good fight." It sums up perfectly to me what makes the Doctor so special and heroic, and all of that is now lost. The first Doctor's decision to steal the TARDIS and fly away means very little if he was just doing exactly what the pre-Hartnell Doctors before him did. The Ruth Doctor is supposed to be before Hartnell, so why does she call herself the Doctor, the man who makes people better, as the Master put it? There is no significance in Hartnell choosing that name if it's the same as the pre-Hartnell incarnations had. These pre-Hartnell Doctors, such as Ruth, had a police box TARDIS, ran away from the Time Lords, and exhibits all the characteristics of the Doctor: heroism, a proactive approach, the enigmatic confidence, and the dislike of weapons. She probably even goes about saving her planets. Everything about pre-Hartnell Doctors takes away from his era. None of the lessons he was learning were really changing anything about him. He was just unlocking all this potential within his DNA. I hate that. I can never get behind that. All media is conveying a message. The message of Doctor Who has always been about ordinary people making a stand against impossible odds simply because it's the right thing to do. Now it's telling the audience that ordinary people can't rebel against the programming and fight for what's right, because the lead character is now an immortal demigod from another dimension. New Who has always lurched too far towards giving the Doctor a mythic Space Jesus stature. This was more of a problem during the era of Tennant and Smith, but it was reeled back considerably in Capaldi's time, as the character went back to basics, no longer the oncoming storm, just the man who stops the monsters. The Timeless Child is the absolute articulation of making the Doctor too special, and in doing so, they've removed the significance of every single character decision that makes the character interesting. And then the episode has the audacity to tell you that none of these revelations actually matter. When have you ever been limited by who you were before? Always. Always is the answer to that. The Doctor has always been defined by her past. The decisions of her past is what motivates the decisions she makes in the present. The positions she takes on every issue. That is how all people work. Not only is the idea of pre-Hartnell Doctors disrespectful to William Hartnell, because he deserves, for meta reasons alone, to be the man who started it all, because for the show, he is exactly that. But the Timeless Child lessens the significance of his whole era in Doctor Who's overarching character arc for its lead character, which has been stretching on 57 years now. I ask this, what is more interesting? A man who ran away from a race of pompous observers to see the universe for himself, who learnt empathy, compassion and heroism from what he witnessed when exploring the universe, and slowly evolved into a hero himself, or some kind of immortal demigod who is special because they are unique, because of their origins and because they were born special. The Doctor was just a Time Lord, and not a very good one at that. He scraped through the Academy with a 51% pass on the second attempt, and was a hopeless romantic who stole a broken TARDIS to see the universe, motivated out of genuine wonder and a desire to see everything. Characters don't need to have special origins to be interesting. That backstory for the Doctor is interesting enough. In fact, I actively hate it when they add all this special origin stuff. I don't want to hear tales about the bravery of lords and kings and noblemen or gods as they fight over lands and borders. I want to see tales of ordinary people pushed into heroism and doing what is right. Some people are born great, some achieve greatness, and some have greatness thrust upon them. This Shakespeare quote can basically be applied to 3 different types of heroes that appear in fiction. But I have never found tales about people who are born great particularly interesting. The Doctor could apply to either of those other 2 categories, But to me, the Doctor is someone who achieves greatness, and you can watch him in those first couple of seasons of Classic Who achieving that greatness. The Timeless Child does, if you take it at face value, take everything special about the William Hartnell years and tells the audience that none of it really mattered anyway. Everything significant in becoming the Doctor was no longer achieved by him, choosing that name, stealing a TARDIS, running away, meeting fantastic companions, and being changed by their humanity. All of that has been carelessly trampled over for a story arc conceived to re-engage a dwindling viewership with a tagline promise of changing everything you think you know. The Chibnall era has given me a lot to complain about, but nothing even comes close to this insult to long-term Doctor Who fans, and this disrespectful tarnishing of this enigmatic, fascinating, wonderful, and totally underrated Doctor, who deserves so much more respect and love than he gets in the fandom, and without whom I wouldn't be sitting here now, complaining about bizarre lore changes to my favourite show of all time.